Hello, dreamers, and welcome back to the second part of our two-part series, The Disappearance of Steven Koecher. If you haven't listened to part 1, stop this one now, listen to episode 140 first, and then come back to this. We're going to pick right back up from where we left off last. We will be getting into Steven's last known movements and go from there. On Steven Koecher's final day, Sunday, December 13th, 2009, there was a video surveillance camera mounted on a home located near the 2600 block of Savannah Springs Avenue in the Overlook Village area of Sun City Anthem in Henderson, Nevada, about a 20-minute drive from where I now sit. Now I'm looking on the maps and I'm under the impression that I might not be able to get into the neighborhood if this is a gated community. If that's the case, I may have to let driving up to the cul-de-sac go. But I do plan on making my way over there just to see it. The surveillance camera recorded Steven's 2003 Chevy Cavalier heading west on Savannah Springs Avenue at 11:54 a.m. The street dead ends in a cul-de-sac. And while many cul-de-sacs usually have single-family homes that encircle the dead end, this particular one does not. From the maps, it appears there may be an access area between the two houses at the end of each side of Savannah Springs Avenue, and then beyond there, there's just some desert land, some dirt, and a spattering of brush. And it is next to this empty area, not in front of any specific house, that Steven parked his car. He pretty much chose the only spot along Savannah Springs Avenue that wasn't in front of a house. So that spot was specifically chosen, it appears, on purpose, as to not leave his car parked anywhere where it might be in somebody's way or somebody would notice it out in front of their house. And I wondered a lot about this. Why did he choose that spot? Now, as I looked at the satellite images of the street that Steven parked on and the surrounding streets, I did notice that there were hardly any cars parked on the street. Every house has its own driveway and garage, and most residents aren't going to park on the street. This community isn't one that's going to be bustling with lots of people. It's a retirement community. It's for individuals 55 and over. So unless they're the Golden Girls, there is probably going to be 1 or maybe 2 cars per household, and if they are elderly, they're likely going to park as close to the entrance of their house that they can. All this is to say that an unknown car is going to be noticed, especially by the security patrol or the homeowners association, and it's going to get reported to the police, and it's probably going to get towed. I'll circle back to that a little bit later. So the same surveillance camera that captured images of Steven's car going by next captured images of what is believed to have been Steven, but because there is no way to be 100% certain, the person seen on the video is typically referred to as a male figure. This male figure walked past this camera at exactly noon, 6 minutes after Steven's car was captured on video driving by. That's when this person walked into the frame. Now, I believe it to be Steven. It makes sense because his car, which appears to be exactly the kind of car that he drove, was on the surveillance video, and it was found later abandoned at the end of that street. It really was the only way that Steven could have walked out of that neighborhood, unless he was going to walk off and head west into the dirt and into the brush and over to the next street. Steven's family believed it to be him as well, based on his walk, his posture, and his stride. It also is said that it looked as though he was carrying a folder or a portfolio with him. I'm sure many of us have watched this video, some of us multiple times, myself included. I looked at it again recently, and it does appear like Steven had some place to go. He wasn't looking around. He wasn't checking addresses. He wasn't glancing at the papers or portfolio in his hand. He wasn't slowing down or seemed to be in search of a specific place. He seemed to be just staring straight ahead and walking with a purpose, and walking like he knew where he was headed. In the video, there are also images that capture a SUV across the street, also headed west. It turned around and parked in front of a house across the street from where their camera was mounted. This would later be confirmed to be a real estate agent who was selling the house that she was parked in front of. There is no video footage of Steven's car actually being parked at the end of the street, though pictures of it would be taken later once it was discovered abandoned. And I do believe the family later rented an exact replica of Steven's car or got their hands on one somehow and went back and parked it on the end of the street and took more pictures in an effort to jog people's memory. So the male figure walked headed east away from his car along Savannah Springs. He crossed the street at the corner of Savannah Springs and Evening Light Street. Video footage of this male figure making this walk sort of diagonally across the street were captured, and then he had turned left and headed north on Evening Lights was also captured on another video camera mounted on the garage of another home trained on their driveway. The male figure can be seen making his way across the street, but also in the foreground of the video, you can see two cars parked in the driveway of the home, and one of them being a dark-colored van or maybe an SUV. Once the male figure walked out of the range of the video camera, his reflection can be seen in the side passenger window of the dark SUV as he continued his walk north along Evening Light Street. And this went on until he was out of range of being seen in that reflection as well. And that was it. That was the last image of what is believed to have been Steven Koecher that have ever been seen. And just a side note, the thought that Steven may have been in that neighborhood passing out window washing flyers could not have been a thing because the business he was working for did not service the area that Steven was in, nor did Steven do the actual window washing himself. Also, as I mentioned earlier, Steven was not present as scheduled to officiate the 1 p.m. worship services back in St. George. And as for his appointment that evening at 7 p.m. for the home teaching session, since he was not at church during the services so they could confirm that appointment, it was assumed that Steven would be unavailable that night. And of course, he never showed up. The very last time Steven's cell phone was used was the following morning, on Monday, December 14th, 2009, at about 7 in the morning. It pinged still in the Las Vegas area, and his phone was used to call his voicemail. So let's stop here for a moment and go over what we know so far, and we'll get more into the movements of Steven's cell phone as well. As I've said, there is a ton of speculation about Steven's case. So let's take him and his life into consideration for a moment. Steven was having some financial difficulties. So he may have been making some of these road trips for purposes of work or looking for work. He was not answering his phone, but he was being candid about where he was for the most part if he did. Aside from the fact that nobody knows what Steven was doing, whether it be that trip to Ruby Valley or the trips up and down the 15 going from Mayopa Valley to in southern Nevada to Mesquite and back to St. George and then back down to the Las Vegas area, everything else about Steven seemed normal and unremarkable. There was nothing that stood out to anyone, nothing that seemed wrong, nothing that seemed unusual. The only person in the world who would have known what was going on with Steven was Steven. He never told anyone why he was making these trips. And the people he did tell or knew about them, they didn't really ask why either. When Steven's apartment, computer, and phone records were examined, those did not provide any answers at all. Whatever he was planning seemed to be going on only in his own mind. He left no electronic footprint that gave up any clues as to what he was up to and why. And to this day, nobody has been able to find an answer to that burning question. And aside from Steven's disappearance, what he was up to remains one of the biggest mysteries of this case. As to why Steven was in the Sun City area of Henderson, why he was on Savannah Springs Avenue, why he parked his car in that particular spot at the end of that cul-de-sac, why he hung a left and headed north on foot up Evening Light Street. Again, nothing in his phone, on his computer. Nothing gave answers. And speaking of Steven's cell phone, everything seemed to match up with what he was doing and where he was at in the days leading up to his disappearance. There was no unusual or unexplained activity on his phone. There were no calls or a series of calls that were unexplained. Everyone who called he knew. He didn't avoid answering his phone. Everything seemed right on point. Just normal stuff on his phone. But the phone did continue to ping for a while after Steven disappeared. And from the locations of those pings, it appeared that the phone was, at the very least, moving. And this is after Steven was believed to have last been seen on those surveillance images. About 5 hours after Steven was seen walking away on that video, his cell phone pinged on a tower about 10 miles or 16 kilometers north of Savannah Springs Avenue, near the intersections of Arroyo Grande and American Pacific Drive. Then about 2 hours later, his phone pinged another tower near the intersections of West Sunset Road and North Stephanie Street. And this is literally up the street from where I now live. I live on Sunset Road. And this is only a 5 or 6 minute drive from the last ping location. It is at this location that calls and texts to Steven's phone went unanswered. Then the following morning, the phone call to Steven's voicemail took place around 7 a.m. This call pinged a tower located near Interstate 515 and Russell Road, which is another 5 minutes away from the last place his phone pinged. The phone continued to ping in that place for the next 2 days, at which point it is believed that his phone died. And a couple of notes about this. Don't forget that we're in 2009 and cell phones were very different, and not everyone had a smartphone. So if it sounds unusual for the battery to last for more than 2 days without being charged, chances are Steven didn't have a smartphone, and it was more likely for a non-smartphone to last that long without being used. And of course, this doesn't necessarily mean Steven was with his phone either and traveling these directions with it, though it is possible. We just don't know. So dreamers, what are we left with here? Well, we're going to start delving into some possible theories and speculations as to what may have happened to Steven. So, we've got Steven. He's just turned 30, with nothing untoward in his background going on. He ended up in this seemingly random place on a dead end of a street in a retirement community about 2 hours away from where he lived. Nothing in his computer or his phone revealed any reason for him to be in this specific location. Some have said that this must be another crazy Craigslist thing. If you recall, it was only 8 months earlier that Craigslist killer, Philip Markoff, was arrested on April 20th, 2009 for a number of crimes involving women that he met through the exotic services section of Craigslist, which, by the way, was subsequently removed from their website as a direct result of Markoff's crimes. He was accused of robbing a woman named Tricia Leffler on April 10th, 2009 at the West End Hotel in Boston, murdering a woman named Jalissa Brisbane on April 14th, 2009 at a Marriott, also in Boston, and attempting to rob Corinne Stout 2 days later on April 16th, 2009, at another hotel, this time in Rhode Island. But anyway, sorry for getting sidetracked. I guess there's nothing stopping me from putting out a little episode on Philip Markoff, I suppose, because why not? I was super fascinated by that story too when it happened. So, likely generated from that story still being fresh on everyone's minds, people began thinking that Steven got caught up in something on Craigslist and met with foul play. But again, I need to reiterate that there is nothing in the way of an electronic trail to indicate that Steven ever made any arrangements with anyone on Craigslist for any reason. And that was mainly the reason why Markov was captured so quickly. They tracked him down through his interactions online and setting up appointments with the women that he met on Craigslist. Nothing of the sort was found related to Steven's disappearance. And along the vein of this whole thing that Steven was part of some possible job lead or potential interview that went sideways, there are a couple of reasons why that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. For one, why didn't Steven park in the driveway or in front of the house of the person that he was in the neighborhood to visit or had an appointment with? And if this was the case, then why are there no phone calls indicating that he had been making arrangements with someone for this meeting? And on top of that, even if someone asked Steven to not park in front of their house, wouldn't Steven think that that'd be kind of odd? Especially since he didn't go to any of the houses that were on the street that he was parked on. He turned left on foot and went up another street and seemingly vanished off the face of the earth. And what's more, this was a Sunday. What are the chances that Steven was going to have a job interview or a meeting such as this on a Sunday in the middle of the day? And we do know for a fact that almost all of Steven's connections were linked to the LDS Church, and they're probably not doing business on Sundays. It's possible, but to me, it's unlikely. We do know that Steven never walked back past those cameras ever again. He never returned to his vehicle. We will explore more theories that I found online in a little bit, but I want to get back to some of the timeline following December 13th, 2009. So back at Steven's apartment, everything there seemed to be normal. He didn't move out. He didn't have things packed up. His room was generally clean. His bed was made and things were put away. So whatever Steven was doing, it did not appear that he intended to abandon the majority of his personal effects. His place looked still lived in, like he was intending to come back. On Tuesday, December 15th, 2009, this is when the Homeowners Association, or HOA, parking enforcement noticed Steven's car had been parked in that spot, not in front of anyone's house on Savannah Springs, for at least a couple of days. They made an attempt to find the owner of the car, but it did not seem that anyone residing nearby had any information as to who the car belonged to. They peered into the window and saw some of the window washing flyers inside with the phone number showing, so they called and got a hold of Steven's boss, Travis. He identified the car as belonging to Steven and provided them with his cell phone number. The HOA left a message for Steven about his car being parked on the street and that if it wasn't moved, it'd be towed. The following day, December 16th, the parking enforcement with the HOA managed to get in contact with Steven's parents. They called his mom, Deanne, and left her a voicemail about the car being abandoned there. Deanne did not check her messages until the day after that. By then, it was Thursday, December 17th. It had been 4 days since Steven walked away from his car. Once Deanne got the message that her son's car had been parked there for days without any sign of him, and after speaking to several members of their family and Steven's friends, she came to realize that nobody had seen or heard from Steven in days. She immediately reported him missing. The search for Steven commenced on Friday, December 18th, 2009. Law enforcement, along with members of Steven's family, searched the areas surrounding Henderson, Mesquite, and St. George. They checked hospitals, jails, and the morgue. The family would also hire a private investigator to aid in the search effort. Among the items found in Steven's car were the window washing flyers, the various receipts from the purchases he made during his road trips, some snacks, that baby bib and Christmas ornaments from Kmart, a shaving kit, jackets, pillows, and blankets. In Steven's apartment, important items found included Steven's guitar, his laptop, his phone charger, groceries that he had purchased on December 9th, job applications that he had not yet submitted, and his passport. The things that were not found in either Steven's car or his apartment included his phone, his keys, his driver's license, and his wallet. Steven's story made it into the media when the newspaper in Salt Lake City published a story about his disappearance on Christmas Eve, Thursday, December 24th, 2009. Steven's mother spoke to a reporter with the Salt Lake City Tribune, and I don't want to come down too hard on her for wanting to keep her hopes and spirits up, at this point in time anyway. But I don't think she was being completely candid with the media. She told the newspaper that Steven was most recently working as a private contractor, that she had talked to him on December 10th, that he was upbeat, he did not tell her that he was down or depressed, and that he did not have any serious concerns about anything. And we know that most, if not all of that, is untrue. She knew that Steven was 3 months behind on rent and struggling to find steady work with a livable wage. Those circumstances alone would have many of us feeling down and concerned. But it just sounded like Deanne wanted to keep it as positive and hopeful as possible, and I totally understand that. But it really doesn't do the investigation any favors by not acknowledging what may have really been going on. Steven was not in a good place. They may not have known how serious Steven's issues were, but I think it was pretty clear, especially after they had heard from that landlord. And I am really sorry, and I don't mean to be hard on the mom or the dad for that matter. I just don't think that they were in touch with what was going on with Steven. And I think when they found out that he was struggling, they, or possibly just Dad, reacted kind of angrily, which would likely only have made things worse in Steven's mind. On Wednesday, December 30th, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police, the Henderson Police Department, and the Nevada Center for Missing Loved Ones conducted a large-scale search of the neighborhood and areas surrounding where Steven's car was found using helicopters, search canines, and all-terrain vehicles. Every single home that had a Utah license plate associated with it was investigated. And in Nevada, cars with Utah plates are very common, same for cars with California and Arizona plates. The search continued into the next day, New Year's Eve. Searchers continued going door to door and passed out flyers as well. But all of it turned up nothing. Now we are getting into 2010, and the searches with dogs and helicopters continued in the Henderson area on Saturday and Sunday, January 2nd and 3rd. On Thursday, January 7th, the Help Us Find Steven Koecher Facebook page was set up. Mass emails were sent out to the residents of Henderson and the surrounding areas of Green Valley and Anthem. Tips began coming in, but each one of those was followed up on, and they led only to dead ends. This would go on for the entire month of January as the family went back and forth between Utah and Nevada, chasing down those leads that they feel are promising. Because at this point, they are under the impression that a likely scenario is that Steven has suffered some sort of mental break and is wandering the streets of Las Vegas. They get reports of sightings, they stake those places out, and they come up empty every single time. Steven's image was also put on the side of Anderson Dairy milk cartons when they were still doing those missing person campaigns, and that triggered more media attention to the case in both Nevada and Utah. But in early February, the Henderson Police Department reported to the media that they have, quote, absolutely no evidence of foul play. The Koecher family was stunned by this official statement of the agency investigating Steven's case, because to them it sounded like they were insinuating that since it does not appear that foul play took place, the likely scenario is that Steven went missing voluntarily. And that meant the police department would not be treating this as a crime. They would not be putting their full investigative efforts into looking for him. Because, as it has been said many a time, an adult can go missing if they so choose. And Steven, being an adult male, is not really high up there on the missing persons priority list. I mean, that might be different now, but historically, the concerns were heightened for missing children, or usually young missing women. But guys like Steven, not so much. By mid-February, the family was frustrated because every time they got a potential clue or a lead, it got completely shot down by logical explanations. For example, at some point in early February, there were 2 charges discovered on Steven's credit card or his debit card. I'm not sure which one, but either way, these are charges that piqued everyone's interest, right? Because somebody must be using his card, and it could be him. This was exciting. Except, when they looked closer at the 2 charges, it was discovered that they were automatic renewal charges that Steven had authorized with GoDaddy. Also, there was an incident with Steven's passport. It was known that he had a current invalid passport because he needed one to do his mission in Brazil. When his apartment was first searched, his family didn't find it. So everyone started running amok with the theories that he fled the country. There was even the theory that you all may have heard that Steven possibly ran off with missing Utah mother of 2, Susan Powell. She had gone missing exactly 1 week before Steven did from West Valley City, Utah. It was a theory floated by her now deceased father-in-law in an effort to deflect suspicions off of his son, her husband, for which there is absolutely no basis for, and no indication that Steven and Susan ever knew or met one another. What a sad case, right? The disappearance of Susan Powell. She's gone. Her boys are dead. Her husband, Josh, is dead. His brother, Michael, dead. And the patriarch of this entire clusterfuck, Steven Powell, also dead. We're never gonna know what happened to Susan Powell. And it's sad and frustrating, but anyway, off topic again, sorry. I'm not even entertaining the possibility of that theory. It's just complete nonsense. So, back to Steven. They first announced that they couldn't find his passport, which gave traction to this Susan ran off to a foreign country theory. But a second, more detailed search of Steven's apartment turned up his passport. So another theory, another possible explanation as to where Steven might be, was completely dashed again. On Friday, February 26, 2010, the Koecher family held a press conference in Henderson. They made the announcement that they were 100% convinced that the male figure seen in the surveillance video was Steven. And as I said, I tend to agree that it is. It makes sense. With his car, the timing, the general look of the person in the video. But honestly, I've never really been one to say something being of 100% certainty when I really can't prove it. So I'd say I'm 99% sure. Because who's to say Steven had not met with foul play prior to this car being parked on Savannah Springs, and the person who committed the foul play drove the car there to abandon it, and this person just so happens to have a similar size and build as Steven, because he is pretty average. We can't totally rule that out because we just don't know. The family announced also at this press conference that there was nothing found on Steven's computer, which was examined by a forensic specialist, that revealed anything as to what he may have been planning or doing. He didn't buy any plane tickets, he didn't purchase any bus tickets, and there was no indication that Steven was up to anything shady, and they believe he went to Henderson for an appointment. What that entailed is anybody's guess, and again, I can't say it enough. There's nothing in Steven's phone or computer that indicates he had planned an appointment or meeting with anyone. And it's really hard to not use your phone or computer to make plans with people 2 hours away from where you live. The follow-up on tips continued throughout April. Ralph was regularly in the Vegas area, communicating regularly with law enforcement in Nevada, and continued to be actively involved in the searches, following up on leads himself, doing everything that he possibly could within his power. And by mid-May of 2010, there had not been one single bit of useful information that has brought Steven's family any closer to any answers. And this would cause the media attention on Steven's case to die down. June arrived, still nothing, and the tips have also tapered off. On Friday, June 18, 2010, the Koecher family private investigator, a man named Craig Retke, addressed Steven's case in the media with a challenge. He said, quote, "I would like to make a challenge. This is to the person who knows exactly what happened to Steven. Put your gloves on and write to me. Use a throwaway phone and call me. Have someone walk up to me and tell me. Whatever you did, I don't care about you. Help me find Steven, period. Nothing else, please." Nobody wrote, nobody called, nobody approached, and Steven's case continued to languish. On the weekend of July 9th and 10th of 2010, Steven's story made it back into the Salt Lake City Tribune when a group of Steven's family and friends set off for southern Nevada to attempt to search homeless shelters in the area. The search was prompted once again by reports of sightings of Steven. It was also in this article that Rolf Koecher mentioned for the first time that Steven had told some friends that he was going to Henderson for work, and they specifically said he went there for an interview, but that was as specific as Steven got with them. It does contradict what had been said all along, that nobody had any idea why Steven was there. But it also doesn't explain how the details of this was arranged, yet nothing on Steven's phone or computer was found to corroborate this. However, oddly enough, it fits into the circumstances surrounding what we know Steven did just before noon on December 13th, 2009. That he had a destination, that he parked his car someplace where it would not be in anyone's way, that he walked up the street as if he knew where he was going, that is, if that was really him that was captured on the surveillance, that he looked dressed for an interview in what appeared to be slacks and a dress shirt, and that it appeared that he had something like a folder or a portfolio in his hand. Now, there is one intriguing theory about this that I'll explore a little bit later on, one that seemed to fill in some of the blanks a little bit more so than some of the theories that are floating out there about on the interwebs. But anyway, around this time, there were more reports of sightings of Steven, one that he was seen a couple of times at an area Best Buy, one that he was seen at a Home Depot. Despite all of that, nothing has ever panned out. No sightings of Steven have ever been confirmed. For the remainder of 2010, there was no further news about Steven. The media grew quiet on the case once again, and no new tips or leads were revealed, at least up until the first anniversary of Steven's disappearance. Several media outlets in both Nevada and Utah published stories about him, and this is when the whole Steven Koecher-Susan Powell connection began making the rounds, which brought attention to the case again, but it was based on conjecture and rumors started by one very sick and twisted man, Susan's father-in-law, also named Steven Powell, and we all know that is absolute rubbish, but the side effect was a renewed interest in Steven's disappearance, at least for the time being. Sadly, Rolf Koecher would only make it a couple months past the first anniversary of his son's death. On February 10th, 2011, Rolf died suddenly and unexpectedly of toxic shock syndrome, a potentially rapidly fatal bacterial infection. He was only 61 years old. It had only been a matter of weeks since he, Deanne, and other members of Steven's family filmed his episode of Disappeared, which aired a couple of months later in April of 2011. And if you recall, Rolf's death was mentioned at the end before the credits rolled. Another large-scale search effort for Steven was launched 5.5 years after Steven's death in May of 2015, led by the Red Rock Search and Rescue nonprofit organization, which is made up of about 200 volunteers. There was no charge for this search to the taxpayers. They operate based solely on donations, and the plan was to meticulously search a 25 square mile area in rough terrain surrounding the housing development where Steven went missing, with the hopes of finding anything that could be linked back to him. Any shreds of clothing, any parts of his remains, bones, belongings, whatever they could turn up. The goal ultimately was to give Steven Koecher some answers so that they could be at peace with his disappearance. There was nothing in particular that prompted that search. There were no leads and no information. There had not been any at all in the years leading up to this search, which eventually turned up exactly nothing. And since then, and to this day, there continues to be nothing. I do believe that nobody, not the investigating agency, not Steven's family, and not the public, know any more today, going on 10.5 years later, than we did the day that Steven walked away from his car. And yes, psychics have chimed in. Everything has been one dead end after another. Getting back to some theories, I'm going to discuss a couple of them on Reddit because there are many of them. I'm just going to go over the ones that seem somewhat plausible or the ones that sound like they make some sense. There is a theory that has been floated that Steven may have been gay, and because of that, it conflicted with his deep involvement with the Mormon Church. That perhaps Steven felt that he would not be accepted by his family or his church if he were to come out, and that even Steven himself was unable or unwilling to accept this. On Reddit, the person who posted this theory said that it is strange that a handsome 30-year-old devoutly Mormon man would still be single. That this would be unusual. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. I look at situations like Steven's or even Travis Alexander, and there are clearly some issues going on there with these young men. With Travis, he wasn't married probably for a few reasons, among them being his inability to settle down with a socially acceptable Mormon woman while working through his underlying, seemingly insatiable sex drive. He was looking for a good Mormon girl, but cheating on them with Jodi Arias. Travis wanted both worlds, and it was a huge reason why he surpassed the age of 30 and still wasn't married, nor was it looking like marriage was within sights. Unless, of course, he decided to marry Jodi, which wasn't going to happen. One of the biggest factors being that Travis was all about appearances. He was a salesperson with a multi-level marketing company. It was said that he was successful, while there's been speculation that he was struggling financially. And this too was on the cusp of the financial recession in the United States. Whatever the case was, whether he was successful or if it was just surface level, sort of superficial success, Travis would have wanted and would have been able to play that part. He had the nice suits, he had the nice house, he had the nice car, he was well traveled. I mean, he seemed like a catch, right? Not so much. We know because we know all his dirty laundry. But the women he dated, particularly during the time that he was involved with Jodi, they knew. They knew that something wasn't quite right with the guy. Of course, Steven wasn't Travis level over the top with his lifestyle. As a matter of fact, by all accounts, Steven appeared to be a fine young man, just a regular guy with a regular family, a regular life. At least that's what it appeared. The one thing I do think Steven had in common with Travis is I believe both of them to be severely insecure, possibly to a point that it was emotionally crippling for both of them. As I brought up a moment ago, the commenter on Reddit referred to Steven as being a good-looking 30-year-old. And it's not wrong, but to me, and maybe to some of you, Steven Koecher is sort of like your cookie cutter, blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy. Nothing really jumps out at you about him, you know? And I don't know, when I see photos of Steven, he doesn't exude a lot of confidence to me. Travis Alexander's pictures, he does more so because it was in his nature as a salesperson. He needed to give off an air of confidence, otherwise he wasn't going to find success in multi-level marketing. But Steven, when you stare at his pictures and look at his eyes and his face, he looks to be kind of a sad soul. I think melancholy is a good way to describe him. And to assume that because he may have been surface level decent looking to us, it doesn't mean that Steven saw himself as that. The fact is, we don't know Steven. And because his disappearance has been so mysterious, I'm not so sure how well his family and friends knew him either. He harbored a lot of secrets. If he didn't, we might know what happened. If we could fill in some of the blanks about Steven's life, so many questions might have answers. But even if we could talk to Steven and ask him, would he even be candid? Or would he give the auto responses, or tell us what sounds right, or tell us what he thinks we want to hear? When someone keeps people in the dark about what's really going on with them, what they do show to the world, is it really genuine? Was Steven at peace with being 30 and single? How was he feeling about his prospects when it came to finding work? If he was struggling financially and understood the country to be in the throes of a massive recession, why not just ride it out at home with mom and dad? Was that completely out of the question? Was it pride? Was it too painful to go back home? Why was it better to be hundreds of miles away, months behind on rent, and with little to no prospects when it came to finding work, than to just go home and wait for things to turn around for the better? Or even lean on one of his 4 siblings? Something was keeping Steven from reaching out to his family. We just don't know what it was or why. Maybe Steven was the type of person who preferred being alone. Does that mesh with what we know about him? Not sure. He was heavily involved in church, which is a very social thing. But beyond that, outside of church, what were his interactions like? He did the family gatherings thing. Maybe he participated just enough to keep up appearances with church and family, but that was all he could muster? I know someone kind of like that. He works in the food service industry and hospitality. Typically, he works late into the night. He goes home and goes to bed by mid to late morning. He sleeps all day and gets up late in the afternoon for work all over again. And because the nature of his job, he pretty much works every holiday. His job never closes, and I tend to think he prefers it that way because it gets him out of having to attend almost all family get-togethers. He's self-isolating right now during the coronavirus pandemic, and I'm pretty sure he's perfectly content not having to leave the house for as long as it takes. It's a little more extreme, but my point is, Steven perhaps did the bare minimum to satisfy his obligations to church and family, but after that, maybe he was done. He was like a turtle that tucks back into a shell until it's time to come out again. I think Steven may have been feeling, compared to the rest of his entire family, that his life was amounting to what he perceived as a failure. He wasn't living up to his family's expectations of him. I think he wanted to live up to those expectations. I think he wanted to emulate his father, but was falling short. And maybe Rolf was hard on him about it. From the time he went to college Steven was doing things similarly as to the way his dad did things. His dad graduated with a degree in journalism. Steven graduated with a degree in communications. Ralph did his mission in Brazil. Steven did his mission in Brazil. Ralph worked for years at the Davis County Clipper. Steven got a job there too, working under his dad. But then, after a year and a half, Steven seemingly decided to diverge from following in Ralph's footsteps. He wanted to carve his own path. He didn't want to be a carbon copy of his dad anymore. Because maybe he felt like he was losing his sense of identity. Maybe he wasn't living up to Ralph's standards, and perhaps Ralph was giving Steven a hard time about it. How many children have tried to follow in their successful parents' footsteps and haven't quite been able to achieve that same level? We hear about it in true crime stories. The Menendez brothers come to mind immediately. It happens to celebrities' kids. The lack of ambition and success is often linked to a spoiled upbringing. In that sense, the first person to pop into my mind is Tori Spelling, because I just recently watched a video where she openly admitted that she was spoiled rotten growing up, and it led to financial problems as an adult. This is not to say that Steven was spoiled. I don't think that at all. And even if I did, I have nothing to base that on. But I do think that he was a disappointment to his dad. And I think his dad made no secret of that and had not a problem with sharing his disappointment in Steven with him. Steven's own family has openly admitted, on the Disappeared episode, everyone was off leading successful independent lives, raising families, all of the brothers, the sisters, the cousins, everyone except for Steven. Throw the possibility of being gay into the mix, Steven was quite possibly spiraling towards a mental and emotional breakdown, ultimately leading to the unexplained drives and his disappearance. There is no indication that Steven was gay. Nobody seems to have ever suspected, but that's not to say that Steven had not become quite adept at hiding it. He wouldn't be the first person to abandon family because of their sexual orientation, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Now, there's nothing that ever indicated Steven might be gay. None of his friends and family have come forward and said that they suspected that he was, nor did he confide in any of them that he was. And I'm also not saying that this is the reason for his disappearance. It could have been another facet. As it is, with a strained relationship with family, with financial problems, trouble finding work, even if he was hiding his sexuality, he had plenty of other reasons to have possibly run off or decide to take his own life. His own mother has suggested that she believed it a strong possibility that Steven committed suicide because of his actions in the days leading up to the time that he was last seen on that surveillance. I don't know if Deanne has entertained the idea that Steven may have encountered someone who did him harm, or if she considered that he may have voluntarily walked away from his life. Perhaps ending his own life was the easiest of the possible scenarios for Deanne Koecher to accept. Foul play is a tough one, but thinking that your own child would purposely leave without telling anyone and never get in touch again, that's probably the worst. Because you'd be in so much pain and you're so brokenhearted. Who wants to think their child would do this on purpose, knowing how devastated they'd be? I wouldn't want to think that. But the possibility can't be ruled out. And along the same lines as this, it's also been speculated that perhaps Steven met and fell in love with a non-Mormon woman, which would also be unacceptable to his family, friends, and social circles. Even with both of those theories, him either being gay or with a woman outside his religion, his family really doesn't believe that he would stay away for this long. Those who don't believe in the suicide theory would say that Steven's body would have been found during any one of the number of searches that were conducted in the effort to find any trace of him, or at the very least in the months and years since, that someone out there in the desert, perhaps doing some off-roading or hiking or camping or whatever, would have likely found something. It's been said over and over, it's difficult to hide one's own body when committing suicide. It's not impossible, I suppose, but considering the location where Steven walked away from, it's nothing but houses and desert. If he was on foot, he could not have gone that far. It was December. The nights are very cold. He was only seen wearing what appeared to be a dress shirt and slacks. He was not prepared for extreme weather, and he would not have fared well out in a cold desert night. If you remember earlier, I mentioned on that same video surveillance that captured Steven also captured an SUV pulling up to a house across the street from where the camera was mounted. The police have said that they investigated the SUV and it turned out to be a real estate agent working to sell the house that they parked in front of. But some theorists on Steven's case don't believe that and feel that it was too coincidental in the terms of the timing when Steven's car pulled up and when the SUV pulled up. It was only minutes apart. The thought is that this is the person or persons that Steven had an appointment to meet up with, and things went bad and he fell victim to foul play for some reason. But again, like some of the other theories, I have to turn back to the lack of electronic evidence. There wasn't anybody that he was communicating with or making arrangements with, either by phone, computer, or email. So I don't know how meetings would be arranged without having left any sort of electronic or digital trail. And the person in the SUV did not recall seeing Steven or his car on the street that day. Now, Steven's landlord, as it turned out, was a bit shady himself. Supposedly, Steven had told his landlord that he was going to catch up on his rent in January, and has speculated that Steven may have been kind of lucky that his landlord was being flexible and patient about it. However, the landlord had apparently been trying to call and text Steven around 4 in the afternoon on the day that he went missing, and then again at 7 in the morning. All of those calls and texts went unanswered. If Steven had worked out a plan to pay the rent, then why would the guy be repeatedly calling and texting Steven, particularly on the last day that Steven was ever seen? Things had already been hashed out between the two, but maybe they hadn't? Maybe Steven was avoiding his calls and avoiding going home? However, come to find out as recent as 2019 that the landlord had found himself in prison on charges related to drugs and weapons. Knowing this information, it has since bolstered the idea that Steven himself may have been involved in some shady dealings, some illegal stuff, and that he may have been involved in illegal activities with this landlord, that perhaps he was doing work for him to help pay off what he owed him. And this is where all the driving would come in. Maybe Steven was running guns and drugs for the guy. Most people don't buy it, knowing what is known about Steven being kind of a straight-laced guy. But maybe he had his back up against the wall. Maybe he wanted to get right with his landlord without having to turn to his parents. However, Steven's parents did take what was being said about their son possibly running drugs pretty seriously, so they hired some drug-sniffing dogs to inspect his car, but they didn't hit on anything. I should also mention that the Henderson Police Department did not conduct a forensic examination of Steven's car. They did not test for DNA. They did not dust for fingerprints. They did not look for fibers, which to me was a serious missed opportunity to find solid clues. Because as I've said, they've never come across any credible leads, ever. Another theory that I found on Reddit involved the possibility of Steven having found a job delivering foreclosure notices, and that perhaps he signed on to this gig through Craigslist or some website seeking help. This was a period of time when houses were being foreclosed on left and right because of the recession and the housing market crash. And the Las Vegas area was hit particularly hard with foreclosures. So the Reddit post said that people were hired as sort of independent contractors. They weren't full-time employees. And maybe Steven didn't want to tell anybody about this because of his pride or whatever. But dreamers, I don't know if I buy that, because Steven was passing out window washing flyers and everyone knew about it. And while I always feel a job is a job, it really isn't any more or any less quote unquote prestigious than delivering foreclosure notices. But the thought is that maybe Steven didn't want to tell anybody about the job because he was worried about getting laid off yet again and didn't want to have to break that news yet again. And if Steven was doing this foreclosure notice delivery service thing, it may explain all the driving that he was doing. It would explain why he didn't need to use the money that his mom and grandma gave him since he was earning money. He assured his landlord that he would have him paid off by January, so he must have been having income coming in from somewhere. So perhaps Steven took on this job, hand delivering foreclosure notices, and maybe he encountered an angry homeowner who was getting foreclosed on and was unfortunately met with foul play. The Reddit post also said that when someone is delivering these sorts of things, that they can make people angry, that they will usually park up the street and walk to the house, because if someone hears or sees a car, they may not come to the door knowing that their property is about to be seized by the bank, that people are likely to open up a door if they are surprised by the knock or the doorbell. The fact remains is that we don't know how seriously the neighbors that lived along that street were investigated. There was a cursory door-to-door canvassing, but did they go deep into public records to see who was being foreclosed on, or did they conduct any background checks on anyone living there? Likely not, because the Henderson police said early on that there was no indication that foul play was involved in Steven's disappearance. Then, there are some who believe that Steven Koecher is somewhere in the world living his best life, that he picked up, left, and never looked back. And if that's the case, well, then more power to him. And honestly, he doesn't owe anyone any type of explanations. Is it right to leave his mom wondering and allowing his dad to go to his grave never knowing what became of him? That's a matter of opinion on all our parts. I do think it's kind of a cold thing to do, but at the same time, I understand. People do things like that for deeply personal reasons. And if Steven is alive out there somewhere, I wonder if he knows just how perplexed he has left not only his friends and family, but an entire community of true crime aficionados and armchair detectives as well. Because isn't his case one of the most baffling and frustrating disappearances you've ever heard of? These ones where there's this last seen on video surveillance and vanishing off the planet really get to us, don't they? So we have a laundry list of possibilities when it comes to where in the world is Steven Koecher. Did he have a mental breakdown? Were his financial and job woes more than he could cope with? Did he take his own life and manage to hide his own body? Did he meet with foul play? Was he gay or in love with a non-Mormon woman? Did he go to Vegas and get caught up in some shady Sin City stuff? Was he living a double life? Did he take a job he didn't realize was dangerous and met his demise as a result? Did he get involved in his landlord's illegal activity because he owed him money? Or did he simply walk out of his life to start all over again? The answer, dreamers, is we have no answers. There has not been a single credible piece of information that has brought anyone closer to finding out what happened to him at all since the day he vanished. Absolutely nothing. At the time Steven disappeared, he was 30 years old. If alive today, he would be 40. He was 5 foot 11 inches tall and weighed about 180 pounds. He was white, with blonde hair and blue eyes. The last anyone saw him, he was wearing a hoodie, jeans, and white tennis shoes. He has surgical scars behind both of his ears, and on his abdomen, he has a series of birthmarks that form the shape of a Nike swoosh. The investigative agencies are the St. George Police Department and the Las Vegas Metro Police. If anyone has any information about Steven's case, the number to call St. George PD is area code 435-627-4319, and the Las Vegas Police is area code 702-229-2907. And that brings this 141st episode to a close. I want to thank you for your patience in waiting for this while I got settled here with the move to Nevada. It hasn't been easy with all of this happening in the midst of this coronavirus outbreak. However, we are all well, and I hope you and your loved ones are too. Please come over to our Facebook discussion group if you haven't done so yet and request to join. It is there we discuss the cases that we cover. We share our thoughts and opinions, not only about our show, but other podcasts that you listen to, documentaries that you've watched. Lately, there's been a lot of talk about the Tiger King, so if you've seen that and want to talk about it, come on over. We talk about current news, coronavirus, of course. We post about our pets. We post funny memes. Please come on over and share. You can also go over to our show's Facebook page and like that page and leave a review or a recommendation. You can also follow us on Twitter at CaliforniaPod and Instagram at CaliforniaDreamingPod. I am a little bit behind on birthdays because of the 3-week break, and I want to take the time to wish the following people either a belated birthday or a not belated birthday. And I also may have read some of these birthdays off already. For some reason, I didn't make a notation in the month of March, but I don't want to miss you, so this may also be a repeat happy birthday. Happy birthday to Zach K. on February 26th, Michelle H. on Leap Day the 29th, and for the month of March, Jorge G., and I'm pretty sure I already gave you a birthday shout out, but here, you got another one, on March 4th, Tiffany V. and Kate M. on the 6th, Shadira M. on the 8th, Cindy T. on the 11th, Amanda E. on the 12th, Shan K. B. on the 17th, St. Patrick's Day, Kelly M. on the 18th, Alexandria F. on the 19th, Laura and Curtis M. on the 20th, Jen M. on the 21st, Andrea H. on the 23rd, Phyllis S. on the 27th, and Juan H. today on the 31st, the last month of March. It has been a long one. I think April's going to be just as long, so hopefully we're all just hanging in there. Anyway, happy birthday to all of you. California Dreaming is brought to you by the Orbital Jigsaw Network, a podcast production company on a mission to create some of the best podcasts to listen to, with an eclectic roster of shows with content including true crime, history, sports entertainment, gaming, and social media. So visit our website at www.orbitaljigsaw.com. You'll find links to all of our podcasts, as well as a direct link to our merchandise store on TeePublic. Again, that's www.orbitaljigsaw.com. Thank you again so much for listening. Please stay safe, stay well, maintain your social distancing as much as you can to do your part to help stop the spread of this virus. I'm your host, Roseanne. Until next time, sweet dreams.
I'm Annie from Boston, Massachusetts.
And I'm Johanna from Vienna, Austria. We are the hosts of Fresh Hell, your international podcast that covers murder, mystery, and the macabre throughout history. Are you interested in the 3,569 ways your household could have killed you in the Victorian era?
Do you know how malaria and syphilis played a role in the John List family murders?
And And have you ever wondered what Prince Albert's sex chair had to do with the murder of Stanford White? Okay, nothing. It had nothing to do with it. We're still telling you about it, though.
It's a pretty great sex chair. If you're looking for another show that talks about Ted Bundy, this is probably not the podcast for you. But if you're looking for two women that cover lesser-known cases from all over the world with a lot of background information.
So much background information that you will rock your local pub quiz from now on.
Then find Fresh Hell Podcast on your favorite podcast app.
We also have German cannibals.
See you soon.
Tschüss.